Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. And Brooke and I want to start by thanking Laura Trump for her extraordinary leadership on this issue. Today, we're highlighting a major win for animal welfare. Ridgeland Farms, a dog breeding facility that supplied animals for research, will transfer its remaining 475 beagles to a large, cage-free, no-kill dog rescue. Most of those dogs will leave the facility immediately and begin the path toward adoption and permanent homes. We are committed to humane animal care and to replacing animal testing with effective alternatives wherever possible. And we're turning that commitment into lasting change. Today, we're also announcing the creation of OREVA, a new NIH office that will accelerate the development and use of humane-based research technologies and help reduce reliance on animal testing across all of NIH.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is such welcome news. As USDA had taken action to hold Ridgeland Farms accountable with federal requirements for humane animal care. We conducted inspections, we investigated conditions at the facility, and we put the operation on notice about inbound accountability. Prior to today's announcement, USDA informed the facility that if it fails to voluntarily cancel its Federal Animal Welfare Act Class A breeder license by July 1st, we will begin termination proceedings. And our work, in addition to groups similarly seeking accountability, has paid off. Accountability matters, animal welfare matters, and enforcement matters. Earlier this year, USDA published a request for information on standards of care for dogs covered under the Animal Welfare Act to ensure that we are aware of the best available science and the latest evidence in animal welfare. And we will continue to use every tool available to ensure that animals receive humane treatment in this country. This is what responsible government looks like: agencies working together and protecting animal welfare.
Thank you to everyone who helped make this happen. But our work isn't finished. We're going to continue fighting to improve animal welfare, expand humane alternatives to animal testing, and hold institutions accountable. Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. I'm joined today by CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz. For years, Americans have walked into hospitals with no idea what their care would cost and walked out with medical bills that wiped out their savings. That ends now. Under President Trump's leadership, HHS is finally getting serious about hospital price transparency. The goal is simple: make health care more affordable by giving every American the ability to shop for care, compare prices, and make informed decisions before they set foot in a hospital. Price should never be a surprise. Cost should never be a barrier.
Since President Trump's first term, every hospital in America has been required to post their prices online publicly in a format anyone can access, showing what the hospital actually charges for every service it provides. Unfortunately, the Biden administration did not enforce these rules. It even told hospitals they could get away with ballpark estimates, not real prices. Immediately after returning, President Trump told us to fix that. So last year, Secretary Kennedy and I worked on regulations to get the real prices to you, the American people. We want to make it easy for you to compare hospital prices against other hospitals nearby so that you can get the best care for you and your family. But you can't do that if hospitals aren't complying with our new requirements. Now, we told hospitals we would begin enforcing these rules on April 1st. Since then, our teams have been actively looking at thousands of hospitals to see if they are following the rules.
Consider this a formal notice to every hospital in America still hiding prices from patients. We know who you are. Significant enforcement began 2 months ago. The grace period has ended. There are no further extensions. If your hospital is not yet in compliance, you are in violation of federal law.
To date, CMS has identified and sent letters to more than 500 hospital facilities who are not yet following the rules. Many of the hospitals are owned by large, well-resourced health systems, billion-dollar networks with armies of lawyers and compliance teams and lobbyists, and are still hiding their prices from the patients that they serve. That is unacceptable. If those hospitals do not come into compliance and transparently display their prices to patients, they will be fined to the fullest extent that the law allows. Federal fines accumulate every single day. Larger facilities can face penalties reaching $2 million for a single year of noncompliance.
Pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, hospitals, no administration in history has done more to hold healthcare conglomerates accountable than the Trump administration. We will use every tool at our disposal to drive down costs for the American people.
Price transparency is central to President Trump's great healthcare plan to lower costs, reduce premiums, and put patients back in control.
Our message to hospitals is simple. Post your real prices. Come into compliance immediately or prepare for serious consequences. Don't wait for a penalty notice. By then, it may be too late.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. I'm joined by Catherine Burgum, my fellow co-chair of President Trump's Great American Recovery Initiative. Today, HHS is launching a nationwide request for information on addiction, treatment, and recovery. We're asking the American people, especially people in recovery, frontline providers, and community leaders, to help shape a stronger national recovery strategy and transform how our country addresses addiction by submitting comments at federalregister.gov.
Since 2000, drug overdoses have claimed more than 1 million American lives. In 2024, nearly 8 in 10 Americans living with addiction did not receive treatment. Addiction has taken lives, destroyed potential, and devastated families and communities across our country.
Catherine and I have spent decades in recovery, so we know firsthand that recovery works. That experience drives President Trump's Great American Recovery Initiative, which for the first time treats addiction as the chronic disease that it is. We're shifting to a value-based care model that rewards lasting results, aligning incentives around recovery, long-term stability, and overall health instead of repeated cycles of detox, relapse, and re-entry into care.
HHS has already taken major steps to expand evidence-based recovery nationwide. We launched a $45 million investment to expand sober housing services across the country. We are investing $100 million to prevent, test for, treat, and cure hepatitis C among people with the chronic disease of addiction and serious mental illness. HHS is also investing $100 million in the Streets program to reduce homelessness, combat opioid addiction, improve public safety, and support treatment, recovery, and long-term self-sufficiency. We have also made it easier for faith-based recovery providers to access federal funding.
Government cannot solve this crisis alone. We need to hear directly from you, and that's why we're asking Americans to share their ideas, their experiences, and their recommendations through this public request for information. We want to hear from people in recovery, families, doctors, nurses, researchers, public officials, faith leaders, treatment providers, and community organizations. Tell us what's working, what's failing, and how the federal government can better support treatment, recovery, and healing. Again, you can submit your comments at federalregister.gov. Together, we can save lives, restore families, rebuild communities, and make America healthy again. Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Real food's the only way to go. And that's real. That's the only way to go is real food. It's been evident, it's been proven to us what happened to people that eat rotten food. Their life expectation is not long at all.
Welcome back to the Secretary Kennedy podcast. Today, it's my great honor and pleasure to have one of my heroes, Mike Tyson, Iron Mike Tyson, one of the most fierce fighters and feared ring fighters in human history.
Thank you.
The undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, 44 KOs.
Undisputed.
But you know, I went on Mike's podcast, I don't know, a decade ago, and I knew that he was a pigeon fancier, And I had been raising, breeding, and racing Hungarian homing pigeons from when I was 7 years old. So it was a huge part of my life. And we ended up spending a lot of the podcast talking about that. And you told me at that time that one of your first fights was over pigeons.
My first fight, actually, my first fight I ever had was over a pigeon.
Can you tell what happened?
Well, I was
this up in Catskill or in Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn, New York. I was 10 years old, and I had a bunch of pigeons. My mother had a bunch of boyfriends, and her boyfriends gave me money, so I bought a bunch of pigeons. And I let one of my friends know, and he told some other guys, and they came over and they bullied me, and they took one of my pigeons. And I was asking the guy, please give me my bird back. And he was calling me all nasty. And I'm giving you a bird. You want your bird back? And he ripped my bird's head off. And this guy was interesting. He hit me. He poured the blood on me. Then hit me in the face with the dead pigeon. And one of my friends said, Mike, you better fight him. And I was scared to death. I never fought nobody. He was older. So I fought. And I won. And ever since then, I fought every day. Every day I fought, yeah.
But, when I heard you talking about the pigeons, because you were so fierce in the ring, but the gentleness and kindness and open heart comes out in your love for these animals.
Hey, listen, I had them so long, sometimes I forget why I love them so much. I just had them since I was 10 years old. Sometimes I forget, I don't know why I love them so much. I just love them. Anybody that has pigeons, I didn't mean to interrupt, but anyone that has pigeons, they understand how I feel.
Yeah. And, you've been through everything like me. You've been through ups and downs in your lives. And there must have been times in your life that you were just soul-crushed.
Absolutely, but I had a mentor named Custody Amato, and he always instilled in me never to give up. Never. It's never, no matter what.
And so that's what kept
pretty
you
much
whole.
My attitude, yeah. He gave me a lifestyle. He gave me discipline to be on diet so I won't have to be obese anymore. Really miss him.
So you were obese when you were a kid?
Yeah. It was the way people used to pick on me all the time. Because I didn't have a lifestyle. I just ate food all day. I come from a neighborhood where processed food is a delicacy. Ultra-processed food is a delicacy.
Yeah. So everybody was eating it in your neighborhood. Yeah. And did your coach, did he get you off of that?
Well, he gave me a lifestyle to stay in shape. The consciousness, whatever, vanity, is to stay in shape.
And did you seem like a guy sometimes that has a lot of anger, but you also seem to have a kind of peace with yourself.
Well, I do, but when I know I'm not at my best as far as my condition and weight, then I get angry at myself. My wife may hear it, my kids may hear it, but I'm very conscious about my appearance now.
And we have your beautiful wife here, Kiki.
Yes, she is.
And she seems like a very peaceful person.
Yes. Her herself, she went through a transformation so she's in great shape.
Tell us about your sister. You shared that on that ad, this really heartbreaking story.
Yeah, it was, but it was a lesson. I learned a lot from it. She was my sister, my best friend, but she didn't have a lifestyle. She didn't know about processed food, because that's all we ate was processed food, because we didn't have no money to buy food. We're the kind of family that knock on the neighbor's door. You have any food? It's crazy. I'm starting to bother me now. But that was my lifestyle.
And and your struggle with weight and that struggle to overcome the tragedy.
Yeah, people always tease me about my weight. It was always like that. But like I said, for my manager, Customata, gave me a lifestyle. And I have a relationship with food. Sometimes it gets kind of, I don't know, peculiar sometimes, because if I'm not in good shape, I won't eat. I just won't eat nothing. If I'm not the weight I want to be, it's just so subconscious, I won't eat.
So did Gus Amato bring you up to Catskill, New York?
Yes.
He took you out of Brooklyn?
Yeah, he took me out of Brooklyn at 12.
Were you in Bed-Stuy?
Brownsville.
Okay.
Brownsville.
And how old were you when you went to Catskill?
12.
And were there other kids with you?
Other fighters there too. All of them was on diet, even the professional fight. They all had to make weight for diet, so that was my lifestyle, making weight all the time, running, training, fasting, eating. That became my lifestyle.
And that's like in my backyard in the Hudson Valley. Did you go to the Catskill High School?
I went to Catskill High School, Catskill Junior High School. I lived there for 8 years.
And what was that like?
It was very slow. Even the guys that came from New York City, the people that came, they wanted a slower lifestyle. And it wasn't like New York. I go down to New York once a week or something to get into some amateur boxing matches and stuff. That's the only reason I stayed up there, lived there for 8 years, and I started my boxing career.
And when you were training, were you focusing on food at that point?
I always had a peculiar relationship with food. I was afraid of food because I was afraid of obesity. You know, seeing that in your family. And, you know, most of my mother's friends, my sister friends, all they were obese as well. You know, it was just a neighborhood where it was what they call the revolving door. It was our culture to be fat. We made excuses for it as well.
What can we do about people in Bed-Stuy now and those other, because they're food deserts? It's hard.
Yes, it is.
You know, I worked in Bed-Stuy because my father started Bed-Stuy
I'm from
Restoration.
Bed-Stuy. I was born in Bed-Stuy.
And do you know Restoration Plaza, that part of Bed-Stuy?
What's neighborhood?
It's near Atlantic Avenue, New York.
I know Atlantic Avenue very well. I lived on Atlantic Avenue.
And my father started a project there in 1966, and it's still there today. It's a community development project, and they built a skating rink, but we built the first grocery store there. And before we built that, the pathway, or pathmark, people in Bed-Stuy had to go 75 blocks to buy groceries. Mother had to ride 3 different buses with grocery bags, so it's hard in those neighborhoods to get good food.
Yeah, that's why, because we used to help ladies carry their bags to their house and their cars and stuff. I remember when we were younger.
What do you think that we can do to inspire people in those neighborhoods to start eating better?
Hey, listen, we need more mentors. You know, they need mentors and show them how to eat, have proper diets, how to take care of themselves. You know, people always say that's one of the evil sins, vanity, but wow, sometimes we need a little vanity to, you know, take care of ourselves and have more self-love. That's what it all comes down to, about how you care about your appearance.
And do you feel that way now that you have?
Absolutely. I'm so conscious of my appearance because of that, because of obesity.
Well, let me just ask you about the stuff I'm curious about, because I got put in prison when I was, in the summer of 2001, I was sober. But I did a protest in Puerto Rico. I was representing the island of Puerto Rico suing the United States Navy, and they put me in maximum security prison for the summer of 2001, and the food in that prison was really bad.
Listen, yeah, what do you say, airplane food and hospital food, huh?
Yeah.
The worst in the world.
Well, yesterday I learned that the price that the federal prison system pays for food for prisoners is about 60 cents a day.
And what can you buy with 60 cents?
Oh, you
Candy,
can buy
sugar,
candy,
sweet
sugar,
stuff.
and anything with a long shelf life. And that's what they said to us.
Some
They
donuts too. That's what, when I was in prison and on commissary, we had donuts, sugar, potato chips, nothing healthy. Maybe the healthiest thing there was the contaminated soup that we ate, over salted soup. But it was all horrible stuff. Now that I think about it, it was great back there because I was eating it, but back then it was just horrible food.
And that makes people angry.
Yeah, that's why that's why it's violent in prison, because of the food that they're feeding them. That's why you see everybody getting stabbed and cut for no reason. It's small little incidents. People want to fight and kill people, and that's what it is, because the ultra processed food.
Yeah, there's
my belief. Yeah, my belief.
Well, it's true. I mean, there's a lot of studies now, and anybody can go on Google and look them up. There are studies that show that when you improve the food in the prison, when you start giving the prisoners real food, the level of violence drops by 50%. The disciplinary problems drop by 50%. In juvenile detention facilities, the use of restraints drops by 70%.
I agree, because they treat them like animals. You know, you can't have that old school of prisoning people and jailing people. You have to have some kind of outlet. They have to have programs there they're prepared for the outside world. You can't put a guy in there, he's fighting and cutting and doing all this stuff, eating horrible food, then let him go. It's like taking a wild tiger and all of a sudden hold him in the cage for 10 years, then let him out. What is he gonna do? Kill people again. That's been my experience with jail and all that stuff.
Yeah. I also, that summer that I spent in prison in Puerto Rico was the most relaxing summer I've ever had because I got to read books that had been sitting on my shelf.
But most prisons are not rehabilitating; they debilitated people. They make them worse when they go out. So now they go commit another crime and come back in. That's why they treat them like that. It could have that revolving door effect.
Yeah.
Most people that's been in prison always come back most of their life. To be in there for the rest of their life.
So what is your message to the American people?
Hey, have some pride and take care of yourself and have some dignity and leave that ultra-processed food alone. There's no solution of stopping it. Everybody's going to eat some of it, but if you're going to eat it, try some moderation. All right, you try to, you got family to take care of, and you can't die at 45 years old, 30 years old, and you have kids to take care of, because that's what's happening. There's young people out here dying. There's not old people out here dying. Young people. Two of my friends both died 48, 50 years old, cancer. It's living wild lives, drinking, not taking care of themselves, and that's a process, and it's going to kill us. Ultra process.
So the message is eat real food.
Real food's the only way to go. And that's real. That's the only way to go is real food. It's been evident, it's been proven to us what happened to people that eat rotten food. Their life expectation is not long at all. If it's long, it's not healthy, it's not good. They're gonna be sick most of their life. Like my mother is sick most of their life because they have bad health.
What is your relationship with President Trump?
Wow, that's interesting to say. Let me see how did I go. I've known him since I was 17. I've been fighting with him since I was 18, 17. And he's always been a guy, this is what I can say about him. If he's with you, he's with you. If he's not, he's not. But if he's with you, he's with you. He got your back 100%. That's what I've learned from my relationship with him.
And when was the last time you talked to him?
I talked to him not too long ago. I was at the White House. I saw him at Melania at the review of that. I saw him there.
And so he sponsored some of your fights.
No, most of them. Yeah, most of my fights. Yeah.
They were in Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, yeah, Trump Plaza.
And what was the greatest fight that you had?
In Trump Plaza?
Yeah.
Michael Spinks broke all records. One of the first super fights of the 80s.
And he was the Olympic champion.
Undisputed light heavyweight champion, Olympic champion. He's a very colorful and decorated fighter.
Is he still around?
Yes, he's still around. He's just been married. He's having a wonderful.
And you stay in touch with him?
Well, I see him periodically, every now and then.
Yeah. Before I close out and say goodbye, can I get Kiki? Can you come on and get in the shot so people can see you? Kiki, thank you very much. Mike, thank you for being with us. And thank you for
Secretary.
Your willingness to stand up and fight for this issue.
This is my finest hour. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're a real hero.
Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. I'm here in Elk Mound, Wisconsin at the Gilbertson Farm, which has 600 cows. And it is a fifth-generation farm that was established in 1875 by this family. I wanted to come here today to Wisconsin to celebrate the Dairy Month, which is June, and also to celebrate President Trump's signing of the Whole Milk for Healthy Children's Act, which will bring whole milk back into our schools.
I'm Captain Gilbertson, Gilbertson Farms. It was an honor to host Secretary Kennedy and Congressman Van Orden today. I appreciate this administration highlighting the importance of dairy and the nutrition programs for kids and the human diet. And I once again thank them for visiting today.
One of the things that this visit brought home to me is the importance of generational investment, not only in perfecting their herd, but in tractors and trucks. And these very, very sophisticated robotics that are used to milk these cows and to measure their health, all based upon AI. And those investments have been made over 5 generations. There's no way a new farmer could come in and make those investments, which is the only way to make the farm profitable.
In the state of Wisconsin, dairy is not just an industry. It's our culture. It's who we are as a people. Eat real food. Dairy is real food. As the Secretary said, it's cost prohibitive to start a dairy now. That's why the Trump administration has made so many incredible financial investments into the existing farms and also helping getting newer farmers into the agriculture industry. It's critically important.
And so we have to save the old farms, because once we lose them, they're not coming back.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary, and I'm here in Milan, Ohio on Chef's Garden Farm with one of the owners. I met many Joneses today. This is Bob Jones, but there's a Jones family enterprise in Amanda Garment, who runs the Culinary Vegetable Institute here. And I had an extraordinary experience today of tasting vegetables as if I was tasting them for the first time. And they all had taste that just exploded in my mouth.
How did you like it?
Crazy good.
Incredible, right?
And that taste is related directly to the nutrient content of those plants. And this is what this farm specializes in, is restoring the old nutrients. Those nutrients are linked to the microbiome, the health of the soil.
At the Chef's Garden, we think that healthy soil makes healthy food, which makes healthy people.
A teaspoon of healthy soil has more microbiological organisms within it than there are people on the surface of the earth. It's an amazing science that we're still trying to better understand.
This part here is kind of the science piece, but people don't eat nutrients, they eat foods. So I'm the bridge between the science world and getting it to our plate.
And this farm, which is its own laboratory, supplies the greatest chefs in our country and chefs all over the world. It ships to 50 states. The chefs come here and experiment with foods. This Culinary Vegetable Kitchen. When chefs come in here from New York and Los Angeles or France or wherever, well, what is their reaction to this place?
I think we saw it even today. Wow.
It's like Disneyland for them.
Yeah, they have all the materials and ingredients to make delicious dishes, to experiment here in the kitchen, but also to bring back to their home.
Well, thank you very much. If we're going to make America healthy again, we got to start with the soil and with farmers like these.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. I'm here in Cleveland, Ohio, with the CEOs of the biggest hospitals in Cleveland, University Hospital, Metro Health Systems, and of course, the Cleveland Clinic.
Everything that you see here is a Cleveland Clinic.
I had an extraordinary tour today. I got to be in an operating theater during a robotic open heart surgery that wasn't actually open heart because they don't need it with the robots.
No, this is a running computer.
And I got to see the biggest quantum computer in the world that used exclusively for medical purposes, and it allows innovation at a scale that we've never seen before. I have so much hope for our system after meeting with these CEOs today. They're all committed to preventative care, to primary care, to family-based care, and to outcome-based or value-based care models.
Value-based care, the notion of quality divided by cost, is actually something that you could program in through innovation.
That's so critical for our patients and will help us transform the U.S. healthcare system from one that's just based on sick care to one that truly promotes wellness.
Mr. Secretary spent a great deal of time understanding how we can use basic approaches to help move the needle on chronic conditions, starting with the food as medicine approach and collaborative care.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for spending time in Cleveland. And I hope that we're able to demonstrate that we can provide exceptionally good care for all people that we treat.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm happy to be in Cleveland.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
This is Otis, and this is Sunny.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary, and I'm here at Hope Recovery Center's Recovery Farm. And I'm with Stephanie Robinson, who is the director of the center.
So, welcome. This is a recovery community center.
This is a model center for addiction treatment for alcohol response that has sober housing, it provides jobs, it has community-based recovery, it has whole family recovery.
This is our pro-social space. We do a lot of pro-social activities. We're just grateful to be here with you, Secretary. It's been just a great day to highlight our Recovery Community Center that has pro-social activities, meetings, and supports multiple pathways, and our Recovery Farm that supports workforce development, combating local food insecurities, and recovery housing. And we are just here to support people and help them access recovery and stay in recovery and become stronger individuals, stronger families, and build stronger communities.
It's a model of the kind of system that gives addicts and alcoholics the capacity to help each other with recovery with a little bit of help and encouragement by the government. And these are the kind of centers that we're trying to replicate and scale around the country. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yes.
It's been wonderful spending the day with you.
Thank you so much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
There is a lot of hope. There are companies that are showing leadership and using sustainable and alternative materials that are free of these chemicals. They're thinking about a new way, and part of the reason we're stuck is there's some entrenched interests that are keeping, or they're holding on, gripping on tight to the $500 billion a year industry, and they're costing human health in the process.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Secretary Kennedy podcast. Today my guest is Leo Trisande, who is a pediatrician and one of the country's leading experts on environmental health and toxic exposures. He's a full professor at NYU, and he's the director of the Grossman Center for the Study of Environmental Hazards. His work focuses on how substances in our food and our air and water, especially microplastics, affect our children's health and contribute to chronic disease. Dr. Trisande has helped bring national attention to the hidden costs of these exposures, both in human health and in economic terms. His perspective is especially important as we launch a new effort at HHS to better understand and reduce these risks. Welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here with you.
And so, I first met you when we made our announcement about we're going to spend a lot of money now, $100 million, to study microplastics for the first time, and particularly the fate in your body.
Right.
Because we know that microplastics are now ubiquitous in the environment. And talk about that for a minute. How dramatic has the increase been in our environment and also in our bodies?
Well, plastics truly represent a multidimensional and urgent threat to human health. When you boil down plastics, there are multiple layers. We're talking about macroplastics that you see on the beaches and in sea turtles. You're talking about micro nanoplastics, visible and invisible materials. But where we've really recognized the urgent threat to each of us of plastics in our lives were the chemicals in plastic. We know that there are 16,000 chemicals, synthetic chemicals, that are in plastic. We don't know anything about 10,000 of them. What little we know about the 6,000 is that they harm wildlife and they harm human health. In particular, the evidence is extremely strong for the effects of plastic chemicals on our hormones. These are our natural signaling molecules that underlie basic biological functions. temperature, metabolism, salt, sugar, and even sex. And the impacts run from cradle to grave and womb to tomb. We're talking about, I'm going to just focus here on the chemicals with the greatest evidence. Bisphenols used in polycarbonate plastics, phthalates used in personal care products, cosmetics, and food packaging. We're also talking about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, the non-stick forever chemicals profiled in Mark Ruffalo's movie Dark Waters from a large contaminated population in West Virginia.
Yeah, I was actually an attorney on that case.
Thank you for all your support and leadership in that regard. It really helped move the needle. And it was those studies in West Virginia that set the foundation. Those were very high level exposures, as you know. Now we know that extremely low levels of exposure that we commonly see in blood testing that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention run through the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. These are exposures that literally affect us all. We assumed at first that only the dose made the thing a poison. This is a notion that was first discussed in 1500s by a Swiss philosopher named Paracelsus. And the idea was that, okay, a little bit of everything will be fine, if you will. Our bodies can adjust. Homeostasis was the common cry in that regard. But we realize that at extremely low levels of exposure to a host of chemicals, metals, lead, methyl mercury, pesticides, and flame retardants can have significant consequences, the biggest consequences at those extremely low levels of exposure. We're talking about grains of sand in the Sahara or grains of salt in the Olympic-sized swimming pool, if you will, extremely low levels of exposure based on the principles of endocrinology, because our hormones, our natural molecules, run around in those same levels of exposure. And whether the chemicals are competing with hormones directly or they're changing mechanisms behind the scenes and how our genes are expressed, they're affecting us all. We're talking about, just to start in the cradle, we're talking about babies being born too soon. Phthalates, these chemicals that are used commonly in food packaging, contribute to 50,000 premature births in the U.S. each year. We're talking about kids who are born with inadequate brain development as a result of that, and they're less well able to perform in school and less well able to perform in the economy. And there are additional healthcare costs that are directly related to those toxic exposures. And I'll talk about that. I can talk about that a little bit later. But just to move along the lifespan, we're talking about babies being born too small as well. Those nonstick chemicals, the PFAS that we just talked about, they shrink growth such that the baby is metabolically programmed to come out of the womb in an avid, calorie-rich environment. They gain too much weight as a result because their thermostat is just set the wrong way, and they accrue more fat than people who are not exposed to these chemicals are experiencing. And so we know that there are at least 50, perhaps 100 or more chemicals that literally make us fatter, many of which are plastic chemicals. And the impacts, I'm as a pediatrician, I'm always going to say kids are uniquely vulnerable. Pound for pound, they eat more food, drink more water, breathe more air, so they're uniquely susceptible. Their organ systems are also just being primed. And so if you disrupt that, there are lifelong and permanent consequences of those toxic exposures that can arise. But to be perfectly candid, Secretary, we are all susceptible to these chemicals. For example, again, the PFAS are associated in multiple studies with diabetes, incident diabetes in adults who've actually lost weight through a healthy diet and physical activity intervention. They've gained more weight back. And then when they looked for a mechanism, they realized that the resting metabolic rate was lower in those highly exposed subpopulations. So they had drawn serum right after they had lost the weight, working hard to keep healthy. and they ended up gaining more weight back as a result of that PFAS exposure. We know that bisphenols also contribute to incident diabetes. We have a large body of evidence now that reproductive development is particularly harmful. We are dealing with increases in infertility across the U.S. population. We know, for example, that again, phthalates are antagonists to the male sex hormone, and those impacts on the male sex hormone lead to a reduction in what we call anogenital distance. And the anogenital distance you're born with is the anogenital distance in a population that you'll have as an adult. Mini puberty, there's a period in infancy where you can change that a little bit because there's a surge of sex hormones. But we know that if you're born with that AGD, you're more likely to have a short AGD in adulthood. And men with short AGD, because of an imbalance of male and female sex hormone factors, are more likely to have infertility, lower sperm count, and even cardiovascular risk. So we're talking about a broad range of consequences. We know that hormone-sensitive cancers are directly related to plastic chemicals. We know that bisphenols are synthetic estrogens that can have ovarian impacts. PFAS have been associated with incident breast cancer. So again, we're talking about impacts that run the entire lifespan. Cardiovascular disease, again, nothing I'm talking about mitigates the importance of healthy diet and physical activity in combating the obesity and diabetes twin pandemics. But we know that phthalates contribute to inflammation in the coronary arteries. They can contribute to cardiovascular mortality. We've identified that 50,000 Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 die early because of cardiovascular disease, costing the economy roughly $20 billion a year. So those are just some illustrative impacts. And that's just talking about really the chemicals that are either additives to plastic materials, monomers in plastic materials. These are, mind you, plastics are long polymers. They're rather boring polymers compared to DNA. DNA has 4 AGCT, in the system. You can vary it a little bit. Polymer chemistry is essentially the same molecule being strung over billions of times. And we assumed for many years that plastics were what you might call inert, that they didn't break down as part of the natural process, contact with food, contact with the environment, with the water supply. And yet we know now, unfortunately, that these chemicals leach directly into our bodies.
You're talking about PFAS and PFOAs, and these are and what we call forever chemicals.
Yes.
And these are the plastic constituents. They can also be in flame retardants, as you pointed out, and in glues, and those are also ubiquitous in the environment. But talking, one of the interesting things that I learned when we did the Dark Waters case is how dangerous these particular molecules are, because your body has such difficulty excreting them, and that's one of the reasons they call them forever chemicals. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the earliest PFAS that were in manufacture were what we call 8 to 12 carbon chains of molecules. So carbon atoms. I don't mean to make, my undergraduate degree is in chemistry, so I'm going to sometimes sneak in a little chemistry and nerd out a bit. But just to take a step back, these are 8 carbon molecules, and that carbon-fluorine bond that makes these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances is extremely what we call polar. It stretches out. The electron energy is distributed in a way that makes it so that materials don't stick. That's really what, in the end, in the polymer chemistry, makes them such useful materials.
That's why they put it on your frying pan.
That's right.
And that's why you should use an iron skillet.
I love cast iron and stainless steel. Last I checked, olive oil was good for your heart. So There you go.
So go ahead. Why does that leave your body?
Well, that carbon-fluorine bond also makes it hard to get out of the body because your kidney doesn't really know what to do. In fact, it'll actually get excreted and then reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So the body actually has this uncanny ability to recirculate some of these longer chain PFAS in particular. Now, as attention with your leadership has been placed on what we call these long chain PFAS, there are now 16,000 PFAS out there. The chemical industry is very adept.
That's because every time we get one banned, they alter a couple of molecules on it and then sell the same thing. And then it takes us 10 years to prove that it's doing the exact same thing as the predecessor chemical.
I don't mean to laugh. I think it's tragic that we have this problem. We literally whack the mole. That's a theme in the field that I study. It keeps me gainfully employed in ways that I'd rather be put out of business, if you will, not having to deal with these chemical compounds that the industry keeps modifying, and we have to keep following a tiger that's getting loose. And in that regard, it's what's really unfortunate is we've gone so far to get some of the longer chain PFAS out of manufacture. This was through a voluntary agreement between EPA and the industry some years ago. And now the chemical industry has developed what we call these shorter chain, these smaller, slimmer molecules. Now they aren't living in the body forever the same way. They actually are being excreted a lot more readily, but they're so ubiquitous in their exposure that they're having the same impact as the older PFAS. And, I can go through examples with bisphenols and phthalates where we have the same old story where the chemistry gets modified. We find out the effects of one chemical. That's what really accelerated the change. And then we realize that the new replacement is as problematic, if not more so, than the old one.
You mentioned fertility. By virtue of me being the secretary of HHS, I also sit on the Social Security Administration board, which means I have to go to a meeting once a year. And in the meeting, they talk about, one of the things they do at the meeting is they talk about the life of the Social Security Trust Fund. So when is Social Security going to run out of money? And one of the key metrics that they have to know in order to make that prediction is the fertility rate in American children. So they do a lot of data collection on fertility. And the fertility levels that we came up with in this last meeting a couple of weeks ago were stunning and historical. And everybody in that room who understood the implications was in shock because we went from 1.9, which is already extremely low, to 1.75, and it was the greatest drop in fertility that has been seen in human history.
2 is the replacement rate.
Right, 2 is the replacement rate, and they actually believe that we're somewhere around 1.4 because there's data manipulation. So it has all these kind of economic implications, like our ability to support Medicare, and the date when the Social Security Trust Fund is going to run out of money. But it also has all other kinds of implications about families and about just the way that we live our lives. You're seeing young people's behavior change, and we're seeing that, we can't explain exactly why fertility is decreasing because, as you know, there are thousands of exposures that are endocrine disruptors that are disrupting it. But clearly plastics and microplastics are part of that picture.
Absolutely.
And male sperm counts, I think, in this country are down 50% for teenage males. I read the other day that teenage males today have less sperm than the average 65-year-old American man. And testosterone rates are dropping. And then you see female fertility issues too, like nothing that we've ever seen before. Will you talk about that?
Yeah. So the reality here is that um, it's as much a problem for fertility as it is a marker of chronic disease, because we know that obesity and diabetes and cardiovascular disease are also impairing fertility. And you talk about the replacement rate. When you have a chronic disease epidemic bearing down on the population, that means that the ability of the population that's alive to serve the economy in a way that keeps that engine going, that generates revenue for the Medicare Trust Fund to stay solvent, you have almost the perfect, if you have a collapse from two different ends, if you will, as a result.
And the Medicare Trust Fund at this point, just so that people know, is scheduled to go bankrupt in 2033.
That's not making me very comfortable.
Well, we can't afford to move that up
Right,
at all.
exactly.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So, we have to really take a step back here and go to Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, at some level. So you make a product to earn a buck. No one here, I myself here is a pediatrician who studies environmental hazards. I'm not trying to impugn.
Yeah, but you're supposed to pay for all the costs of getting that product, building it, and getting it to market.
Right.
And what the plastic industry does is it externalizes that cost.
You nailed it.
And it put the cost on the American people so that they get to avoid the cost and they get to outcompete their competitors in the packaging industry. And we end up paying for their profits, essentially, which gives them that huge advantage in the marketplace.
Yeah. I've taught undergraduates and graduate students at NYU for over a decade about the fact that Adam Smith is rolling over in his grave about externalities, because if you're a nerdy economist, you realize that means you overproduce the materials above the market equilibrium, and the cost is lower than the true social cost. So it's really not the way the market should work, period.
It's a market failure.
It's a market failure, quite simply.
Right. The ability for companies, for the plastic industry to externalize their costs means they're not functioning in a free market economy. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what all polluters do is they escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay their production costs. And, in a true free market economy, there should be incentive. The incentives, you want to punish bad behavior and reward good behavior. But if bad behavior is not punished, if it just goes for free, then you're going to get a compounding effect. And that's what we're seeing with, every time we catch them, they just produce a new molecule that does the exact same thing, and they're getting away with it.
Yeah, I've spent nearly my entire career studying and quantifying these externalities. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm still a pediatrician, so I still wear those hats. But what we first did back in 2015 was document for a limited number of conditions, a limited number of chemicals, the social costs of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And what's frightening when you take a comparison of Europe to the United States is that policies predict exposures, exposures contribute to disease, and disease ultimately costs us all. So in the European Union, the cost of endocrine disrupting chemicals is about 163 billion euro, 1.2% of gross domestic product, nothing to laugh at. In the US, using similar methodology, $340 billion.
And what's the difference? In Europe, they actually have taxes on producers. So that if a producer introduces a product like packaging into the stream of commerce, they have to pay for its recovery.
Yep.
And so they're incentivized to not only to recycle and to reuse, but also to reduce the amount of plastics. In Europe, you can't, I remember you used to be able to buy a CD in this country that's this big, but it would come in a package this big. And we've all gotten Amazon boxes with a little tiny, item in there that are filled this high with peanuts.
Right.
Oh, styrofoam peanuts. And in Europe, they would never do that because it would eat up their profits because they got to dispose of every one of those peanuts.
Right.
And that's why in Europe, they don't have landfills like we have. The Fresh Kills landfill is the highest point on the east coast of North America.
Yeah.
Because we're subsidizing the disposal of garbage and packaging. And in Europe, they don't do that. They force the guy who introduces that into the stream of commerce to pay for its recovery or its disposal. And that means you get products there that are not ornately wrapped.
Right.
Because that wrapper is costing them. Here, the taxpayer is paying for that wrapper.
Yeah. So flame retardants, for example, just to build on that, were roughly 2/3 of that $340 billion, 200 some odd billion dollars. The costs in Europe, because they didn't require it be added to, again, this is a plastic related cost because they were adding it to polyurethane foam in the United States under the guise that you were going to...
fire safety.
Correct. They were going to slow the spread of fires and you were going to save kids' lives. They were...
And meanwhile, it killed a lot of firemen.
Sadly, it didn't do any good. It didn't save any
It
lives.
gave cancer. You have all these firemen now who are suffering from testicular cancer because of the chafing from the fire gear.
Well, the biggest cost of all was the developing brains of young children because baby relies on mom's thyroid hormone through the second trimester of pregnancy. And this is the sad part, is that obstetricians, they don't see the effects because the impacts of, even in the clinically normal range of thyroid hormone, even subtle changes in thyroid hormone function contribute to cognitive deficits, autism, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So what you see is a silent epidemic of kids with lower IQs in the United States compared to Europe as a result of that legacy of exposure. So, just to put this in context for the audience, a kid loses an IQ point, mom doesn't notice, pediatrician, nobody notices. Teacher doesn't notice, no offense.
Back in the 1980s, we got leaded gasoline out of the gasoline. And as a direct result from that, the national average IQ went up 2 points.
Yep.
And I remember talking to an epidemiologist at that time, and he said you could lose 5 IQ points across an entire population, and nobody would notice. But
getting let out of
you're crippling that society.
That's right. But getting let out of gasoline and paint provided a $200 billion to this day economic stimulus package, because each IQ point is roughly worth 2% of a child's lifetime economic productivity. And if on average they make $1 million, I'm mixing my millions and my billions, haven't had enough coffee, that's $20,000. You multiply that up around 4 million kids born in the U.S. each year, you get a lot of zeros on the right side. And, we should have learned from the success story, the public health victory of getting let out of gasoline and paint. But here we are, just to use flame retardants as an example, and you see this disparity where Europe only has $9 billion or so in costs, and the U.S. suffers $200 billion in lost economic productivity and other costs associated just with flame retardants because they're being added to these plastic foams.
I remember seeing also studies from the lead in the gasoline, because lead caused behavioral issues too, and it caused violence.
Yes.
And that generation was the most violent generation in American history. We had the riots and, crime rates going through the roof. And when the lead came out, it was coterminous with a reduction in a lot of that violence. But I'm wondering if the same thing isn't going on with plastics, as plastics are not just causing physical problems. there are behavioral issues as well, and that they may be connected to ADHD and depression, and like you said, autism.
So, in many ways, it's a good analogy because plastics is like a lead moment. Back in the 70s, we didn't have perfect science. We had a few studies that were very suggestive of cognitive impacts and behavioral impacts in kids. But the adage is you look at the stakes involved in the problem. When Sir Austin Bradford Hill, this British physician who described the criteria for causality, he was doing it during the tobacco wars. Mind you, talk about another group of industrial activities that
And
have
for
had their
people who don't know,
impacts.
the Bradford Hill criteria it's a schematic for proving causation. It's a series of questions that you need to answer in order to prove that a certain exposure results in kidney cancer or whatever the outcome that you're looking for is. And it's used in court to it's used throughout medicine.
It's used around
throughout
medicine
the
as well.
regulatory approval process, but it's also used in court cases to show causation.
And where it's gotten manipulated over the years is we've
Yes.
assumed that we have to have a randomized controlled trial to prove an effect. You're never going to be able to design, you can maybe reduce exposures to plastics, let's say, in people's lives and follow the populations and see what happens. But in the context of all the different plastic exposures, those are hard to control. And you compare that to a drug trial where you're intentionally giving for benefit a pharmaceutical to a population. You can have a proper control group, if you will. That's just not going to happen when it comes to chemical exposures. So we have to look at observational evidence, and we have to, again, use what you talked about, the Bradford Hill criteria. You see what happens in laboratory animals, in tissues. You look at consistency across different observational populations, people you look at, and yes, you're not going to have that proper control group, the unexposed control group. But when you look at the evidence for plastics in human health, you have that independent corroboration. Just to give you an example, for phthalates and brain development, phthalates are also thyroid hormone disruptors, by the way, and they're linked to cognitive
And that's in
deficits.
plastic packaging.
That's right. They make plastic softer. Those PVC
Yeah, so
pipes.
even if you buy hamburger meat, that comes with that plastic wrapper on it, that is going to be loaded with phthalates.
That usually is the case, or at least I haven't seen industry proof that they've taken it out altogether. Let's just put it that way. And so in this large Dutch cohort where we looked at phthalate exposure supported by the National Institutes of Health, mind you, so I want to give due credit where credit is due. It's that science that really brought us to a place where we understood the impacts on human health. We not only found decreases in IQs through neuropsychological testing. These are psychologists who are testing how kids are performing on various tests and things. They looked at the brains using magnetic resonance imaging, and they found smaller brains. And when you connect the dots, and they did statistical tests to try to explain the pathway, the loss of gray matter, if you will, the smaller gray matter, smaller total brain volume, was what explained a lot of the effects on IQ. So there's two things going on here. You have an explanatory path, and thyroid is part of that explanatory path. It's part of the mechanistic insight that really gives us the evidence, the strong evidence, the rigor and reproducibility. And you have different ways of measuring the same outcome, giving you the same readout. So when Sir Austin Bradford Hill talked about, the criteria for causality, he always talked about it as shades of gray. There are things we still don't know, Mr. Secretary, about lead and their impact on the general population. But now we've accumulated all this evidence that tells us that that was the right thing to do at the time. And so you have to weigh the stakes of the action together with the available evidence, because it's never going to be perfect lest you have another generation of people who are exposed to the same toxic exposures.
Now, I do want to just say a word for Herbert Nadelman.
Yes.
Who was, he was this very tenacious, courageous scientist who was the first one to link, led to the loss in IQ and all these behavioral issues. And he was, as predictably, vilified, and his career was almost destroyed. And he was marginalized and censored and ridiculed,
Yep.
and by
His
the
cabinets
press,
were
by the
locked.
mainstream press, by television and radio and the newspapers, and the industry was funding all under the sub rows of funding to destroy him the same way they did with Rachel Carson.
Yeah.
And anybody who challenges these paradigms.
Well, science is inherently political, and I appreciate this in the field, having learned from Dr. Needleman's legacy, that you have to develop a bit of a tough skin and appreciate that these industries are profiting, if you will. And again, I don't disabuse myself of the fact that people have to profit in life. But to give you a statistic that puts it in context, the plastics industry global revenue, this is like all across the world, is $500 billion or so dollars. We did a series of studies built on that endocrine disrupting chemical evidence that I talked about earlier, that $340 billion US cost. We had some other data for PFAS, some other data for phthalate impacts that we had later identified. So mind you, this is like 20 or so chemicals that we were able to isolate, a subset of diseases due to the few chemicals we studied, and a subset of costs due to the few diseases, due to the few chemicals we studied. So this is an underestimate of an underestimate of an underestimate. And we found the cost for $250 billion a year in the U.S. population.
So that's the subsidy that the industry is getting from us. Half of their revenues are subsidies.
Off of our skin. So at some level, this industry, I hate to say it, is a bit of a loser. I'm not going to call anybody a loser. That's rude. But I am going to acknowledge that we need to change our ways. And, we can talk about this later on, but there is a lot of hope. There are companies that are showing leadership and using sustainable and alternative materials that are free of these chemicals. They're thinking about a new way. And part of the reason we're stuck is there's some entrenched interests that are keeping, or they're holding on, gripping on tight to the $500 billion a year industry, and they're costing human health in the process.
Talk about the principal vectors by which microplastics get into the human body. And first of all, quantify how much plastic are we all carrying around right now, and particularly in our brain.
So there are people who've attacked Matt Campen at the University of New Mexico for this estimate, that it's a proverbial tablespoon of plastic in the human brain. Of micro-nanoplastics.
So every American, on average, has about a teaspoon.
If it's a teaspoon or a tablespoon, it almost doesn't matter. I think the point that it is that it's there, and it's there in substantial quantities. Now
it's like 1% of the volume of the human brain, right?
But even if it were 0.1, Mr. Secretary, let's say we could even move the decimal one way or the other. And mind you, the controversy, the attacks he's gotten are that fat can be, when you put it on the instrument that you use to measure micro-nanoplastics, gives you what we call a polyethylene is a form of plastic, a polyethylene signature in the machine readout that is clouded by the same signature you'd be looking for the polyethylene plastics, the micro-nanoplastics. Suffice it to say that even if I don't even want to have that debate because it's not worth having. It's there, and it's there in substantial levels. And mind you, the higher levels were associated with dementia in those populations, decedent brains with higher micro-nanoplastics.
The people, the cadavers.
Correct.
Who had dementia had consistently much higher levels of microplastics in their brain.
And then they looked temporally based upon the year of death. They had an annotated archive, and they showed a trajectory that was upward. So, it could be 0.1, it could be 0.21, it could be 1. At some point, I don't really care. I think I care about what's happening to the human body at some level.
And there's no way that we know of this time of chelating it out of your body.
At the present time, no, but we'll talk a little bit about the STOMP initiative, I assume, and the opportunities to look at things like that. But this is prevention is the cure.
Right, prevention is the cure. Let me get back to my original question, which so the audience can know what to avoid. What are the primary vectors? Is it bottled water? Is it eating fish with microplastics in it? What are the primary vector? Is it cooking with nonstick surfaces? What are the worst ones?
It's a great question, and I actually don't have the percentages to give you because we haven't done a national human exposure assessment study for about a couple decades, unfortunately. I mean, I'm hoping perhaps Administrator Zeldin might be interested in pushing that forward because we could really do a study of dust, of water, of food packaging, of air, and really integrate the totality of exposure so we could tease that out. But I can give you top line.
And do you do that with animal model studies or?
You would do in people's homes.
Okay.
Survey them the way you knock on doors and take 100 people from one part of the country, 100 people from another.
And then what do you do, a blood test or?
Well, you would do dust levels, water levels, urine levels, serum levels. You would look at a lot of different tissues and integrate the data and see what you would find out and which signals are really ticking up people's exposures.
So what is your guess then?
Yeah, I think food's number one. I'm not a person who wagers, but food packaging and food contact materials are likely the biggest source. I would say, and I think this is multidimensional threat, as I talked about. So I'm giving you the best available data based on the chemicals more than the micro nanoplastics. We don't actually have a lot of data right now about the sources of micro nanoplastics exposures. What I can tell you is when it comes to plastic chemicals, there's enough PFAS in the water supply of 150 million Americans such that the National Academy of Sciences suggests clinical testing for these populations. And I'd argue suggests the opportunity for water filtration and steps because you can improve lipid levels, you can reduce the risk of thyroid cancer or thyroid dysfunction. It's actually not thyroid cancer, kidney and testicular cancer that have been increased most
Kidney
definitively.
cancer was the outcome we sued in the Dark Waters case.
Right. And so I can tell you that dermal exposure is an unappreciated route. I'm a runner. Well, running requires often a lot of, materials that are tightly adherent to the skin. The way the designers have developed them over the years is mostly polyester or nylon. I have adapted a lot more towards cotton, or at least using an inner layer that's natural to try to avoid that. But that gives you an example. Cosmetics are a major source of exposure, and that's because things just absorb into the skin quite readily. Thermal paper receipts are unfortunately a significant source of bisphenol exposure because that is a polycarbonate film that is often, I think some of the industries will debate whether it's still polycarbonate. I'd like to see the data and then I'll back off the claim when that's really given to me. But you touch that material, particularly if you use like hand sanitizer or alcohol or lotions, that will also facilitate the absorption into the skin and ultimately directly into the serum. It bypasses the liver, so the first time around the body, it can have an even more significant effect. So we inhale these chemicals as well, and inhale, particularly a concern about micro nanoplastics, is that these act like particles. That's the big debate here too, is when we're talking about micro nanoplastics on the one hand and chemicals in plastic on the other, are they toxic drug delivery systems for the chemicals? Or are the particles like punching bags or literally fists hitting tissue and being wrecking balls directly? That's akin to what we thought particulate matter was doing to contribute to lung cancer, asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and such. That's where the STOMP initiative can break a lot of ground, because from a scientific perspective, I can't tell you what those micro nanoplastics are doing. Mind you, we use in medicine micro nanoplastics as drug delivery systems. Those sustained release capsules are plastic particles. Now, that might make people shudder a little bit, but the intent is to actually deliver beneficial drugs to tissues. But that's just the imaginative perspective I can give you, in that these micro nanoplastics are not inert, and they are good at delivering chemicals on the one hand, beneficial when it comes to pharmaceuticals like omeprazole or what have you, and on the other hand, toxic chemicals like phthalates or bisphenols.
You mentioned a couple of times STOMP, and just so the audience knows,
Sure,
that's a program that we announced from ARPA-H, which is part of my agency, and it develops cutting-edge solutions, and it can act very, very quickly. It's very nimble, and we're putting $145 million into that to look for the first time at the fate of various kind of plastics in the human body. And so, there are, as you say, thousands of constituents, and there are different families of plastics, and some of them may be inert. Some of them we know are very, very dangerous, and yet we don't know what different ones do when they enter your body, where they migrate to, and where they lodge, and what kind of harm they do. And so for the first time, we're going to have that map, and we're going to be able to characterize it. But talk for a minute about plastic water bottles.
Yeah, so plastic water bottles, I wrote in my book, Sicker, Fatter, Poorer, when I originally was just focused on endocrine disrupting chemicals as a broader issue, everything from pesticides to plastic to other materials. I talked then about the fact that, you're in the car, you're going to grab a hot, water bottle that's been in the sun, and there's been a lot of weathering to that to that plastic bottle, and that plastic bottle is just not inert enough to handle it, and the plastic leaches in a variety of forms. Micro nanoplastics, well, on this hand, and then chemicals as well. And that kind of leaching has been very well described, and it's probably an important source and contributors. Probably that's a big reason why I drink from other materials, stainless steel water bottles. If I'm getting on a plane, I'm going to clear security with an empty water bottle or have some ice in it, and then top it up with water so I can get where I'm going. And often when you're buying a plastic water bottle, you're really buying not the water, but the plastic bottle.
Right. Because the water is free.
Right.
It's coming out of the ground, or it's coming from the tap, and they're treating it slightly for nothing.
Right.
You're paying for the packaging. You're paying for the plastic bottle and the cardboard case that it comes in.
That's absolutely right. I mean, as I was alluding to, every water supply is a little bit different. So there are certain circumstances where you might not want to pour from the tap, or you might want to filter your water, or even more aggressively use like a reverse osmosis filter if you have a significant PFAS contamination issue. But buying that plastic water bottle and assuming it's free of toxic chemicals is maybe a bit foolish to assume.
How about the big plastic bottles that people put in the little water machine?
Well, those have a recycling number 7 and sometimes have polycarbonate in them, and polycarbonate is a polymer of bisphenols typically.
And is there a difference when you buy a gallon jug of water? Some of the water bottles are cloudy, and some of them are clear. Is there any difference between those two?
That's hard to say, unfortunately. All I can tell you is based on the recycling number. That's the number with 3 triangles in the middle. The ones I try to avoid across the board are 3, 6, and 7. 3 is for polyvinyl chloride, which includes phthalates as an additive typically. 6 is polystyrene. Styrene, the monomer, is a known carcinogen. And 7 is a bit of a hodgepodge class. I should take a step back and just clarify that It includes polycarbonate plastics and some bioplastics, but the specificity and the declaration on the label is a bit ambiguous. So I usually suggest avoiding 3, 6, and 7 in general. But also in general, I would suggest trying to use stainless steel or glass whenever possible.
Can you just talk a little bit more about endocrine disruptors?
So I'd start by saying there are safe and simple steps that we can all take to reduce endocrine disrupting chemical exposure.
And endocrine disruptors are chemicals that interact with with our sexual development or our hormone system.
Any variety of hormones from temperature, metabolism, salt, sugar, and even sex are affected by these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And the good news is they're safe and simple steps that don't require a PhD in chemistry, and they don't have to break the bank. Reducing canned food consumption can reduce your bisphenol exposure, besides thermal paper receipts, which we already talked about having as a potential source of bisphenol exposure. Avoiding microwaving and machine dishwashing plastics is important. We already talked about that hot water bottle bleaching plastic, micronanoplastics, and chemicals of concern. We know that microwave and machine dishwashing plastic is just inviting at a molecular level, at an invisible level, these chemicals or micronanoplastics to leach into food. Now, air is something to think about as well. During the pandemic, there were some studies done at Brown University that did greater air filtration and found PFAS, flame retardant, and phthalate levels to drop substantially. This was in concert with colleagues at Sound Spring Institute, a great research group that documented this. So as much as we talk about infectious transmission being reduced by air filtration, you also have the benefits of reducing chemical exposure in the process. In another setting, just taking healthy building materials and putting them into place can reduce dust levels of these chemicals as well. A little bit more of a higher level intervention, maybe a little bit more out of your control. But again, if you talk about reducing your canned food consumption, using more glass and stainless steel, last I checked, cast iron and stainless steel pans are not that much more expensive than nonstick cooking materials. Not microwaving or machine dishwashing plastic, if I haven't talked about that already. These are steps, again, that don't have to break the bank. And, short-term changes have shown big impacts. There are studies that have shown 30 to 50% decreases in urinary levels. The phthalates and bisphenols, for example, in contrast to the forever chemicals, that we call them everywhere chemicals because they're everywhere and they recirculate in and out of the body super fast. Their half-lives, that's the time it takes to excrete about half of them, is 24 to 48 hours. So it shouldn't surprise you that if you take a dietary intervention in a high-income population or even in a low-income population, just reading the label and selecting cosmetics without the word phthalate, that's a mouthful to spell. PHTH is what I always tell people to look out for. Or fragrance. Fragrance is a big loophole, if you will, that you can drive a Mack truck through, unfortunately.
No, you should avoid phthalates. You should avoid fragrances when you get your cosmetic.
Yes. These short-term exposure reductions can, when sustained, change hormone levels in weeks, and then in the long term contribute to reductions in chronic disease risk. And, when I wrote the book Sicker, Fatter, Poorer 7 years ago, that was the hope, was to get that message out there and change us from a situation where 1 to 2% of us know about it and bring us to 3 to 5%. And, I'm really gratified to have your support and leadership in so many ways in this space, through the ARPA-H initiative, through listing microplastics as water contaminants. The generally recognized as safe exemption is something that you've shown just some tremendous leadership in pushing out there, and I hope you keep pushing. There are a lot of petitions out there in the Food and Drug Administration that with your pen, you could get rid of so many of these chemicals that are in the food supply. You have so much power, and this is a really crucial moment. I know you've got the support of so many people out there in the general public. They're
And we're
really
working on it.
concerned. I appreciate that.
Dr. Leo Trisante is the director of the Grossman Center for the Study of Environmental Hazards at New York University. And thank you, Dr. Trisante, for joining me today.
It was an honor and joy to be with you. Thank you so much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
The message that more people need to hear is the idea that a lot of these originate from natural primal practices that most people could do for free in their own backyard.
Hey, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Welcome to the Secretary Kennedy podcast. My guest today is Ben Greenfield. Ben is a professional athlete, a performance coach, leading voice in nutrition, fitness, and preventative health. He spent years helping people improve their health through diet, exercise, and daily habits, focusing on practical ways to build strength, resilience, and long-term wellness. And I really want you to on here just to talk about biohacking, but we'll get to that in a minute. Before we started the show, you asked me about the heat in Washington. It's 90 degrees here today. And I said that, that I had been to a gym this morning that didn't have air conditioning.
Yeah.
And it was actually a good thing because it's good to work up a sweat.
Yeah.
You also were saying that it actually builds.
Yeah, I mean it's
red blood
so
cells.
there is of course like the increased mental demand of working out in the heat, but then if you look at what's occurring physiologically, and this is all fresh on my mind because my 18-year-old son was complaining the other day that the AC wasn't on in our gym at home in Idaho, and I told him the same thing I'll tell you. When you look at increased heat shock protein production, which basically increases cellular resilience. When you look at increased blood volume, which is one of the direct contributors to VO2 max, and probably most interestingly, when you look at what Tour de France riders used to lay down in the back of buses to inject illegally EPO, erythropoietin, like a precursor to red blood cells, all of that increases when you're working out in the heat. So if the AC is not on at the gym, you're basically getting a lot more out of what you're doing at the gym, even though it sucks a lot more.
You're an endurance athlete, right?
Former. I'm sane. Now I'm just kettlebells and walking.
What is the toughest thing that you've done?
I did 13 Ironman triathlons, Ironman World Championships 6 times, raced professionally in obstacle course racing for Spartan for 4 years.
And what is that?
Spartan is burpees and monkey bars and hauling sandbags up the side of mountains because they have every darn race at some kind of a ski resort at altitude, and typically running around a corner and coming face to face with whatever obstacle they've decided to build out in the forest or out in the middle of nowhere. And they range kind of like triathlon does from everywhere from like 30 minutes up to the death race, which was probably one of the harder events that I did, which was 3 days. And that was not in the heat. That was a winter death race, and it was out at the Spartan CEO Joe DeSena's farm in Vermont. And I remember my buddy dropped me off at that race, and his dog wouldn't even get out of the car because the ground was too cold. So it was 38 degrees below zero during the cold snap back east. This would have been like 7 years ago. And it's just 3 days of obstacle course racing.
38 below.
That's not wind chill. That's like on the thermometer, 38 degrees below zero. And that was probably the toughest just because of the thermal management combined with going out and doing obstacles for 3 days in a row. So that's up there.
And how many miles is that?
I have no clue. You're literally just doing random tasks and obstacles for 3 days. I mean, we would at one point we were in teams and dragging a canoe across a frozen lake, and then wayfinding and trekking to the top of a mountain.
So they just make stuff
We
up.
probably could. They just make stuff up. Yeah, half of it I think began with someone with Joe just wanting people to do yard chores at his farm and chop wood and haul rocks up a mountain.
But the Ironman is standardized.
The Ironman is standardized. Yeah, 140.6 miles. So you swim 2.4, ride 112, and then run a marathon for dessert.
Yeah, my son did that in Texas last year. I went and watched him compete, which was really extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean they're incredible events. I mean what I tell people when it comes to those type of slightly masochistic events is they're great for climbing your own personal Mount Everest and building mental resilience, but don't fool yourself into thinking that they're actually a healthy sport, right? You reach there's the so-called Goldilocks zone of exercise where once you exceed about 75 minutes of vigorous physical intensity, and most people don't even do like a minute of vigorous physical intensity per week, so most people don't need to worry about that, or 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical exercise per week. And this would be kind of like the marathoner triathlete-esque swim, bike, run protocol. You tend to see increased risk for arterial stiffness or atherosclerosis. So part of that is probably due to the inflammation, the dehydration, some of the chronic repetitive stress on the joints. So Ironman is it's a great goal and a great obstacle, but probably not one of the healthiest ways to stay fit.
I was thinking about that because I saw there's now a woman who's the best long distance runner in the world for the sort of ultra long distance.
Yeah,
these 20-hour, 30-hour race. I think some of them are 50-hour races.
Yeah. And I mean,
and it sounds like it couldn't be good for you. Right?
You know this. I mean, if you like Google image search marathoner versus a sprinter, typically the sprinter has the body that looks a little bit more functional and strong, and appears to be a little bit more resilient. And then, if you even take me, like coming out of Ironman, when I shifted to Spartan racing, I mean, I couldn't carry a gravel bucket up a hill. I didn't know how to climb a rope. I could do like maybe 5 pull-ups. I didn't know how to do monkey bars. You didn't have the mobility to crawl under barbed wire. So for me, it was a wake-up call about the idea that, yeah, you could you could look good in spandex and have a big cardiovascular engine, but that doesn't necessarily translate to well-rounded physical health. Or physical fitness, I should say.
Let's talk about biohacking. I spent a day with Gary Brecka in Miami.
Fun.
At his crazy house.
It's right in the bathtub.
He's got everything in that place. It's like a hell spa.
Yes.
But his son was there, and his son had never run a marathon.
Yeah, Cole, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think he ran, do I remember, like 7 marathons in 7 days? Or
seven in 7 days on 7 continents.
On 7 different
Which is the
continents.
hardest part if you think about getting on an airplane after
Right.
you raced a marathon. Yeah.
And one of them was in Antarctica. It was really cold. And then he went right up to Egypt, I think, and ran it in the Sahara. But he actually...
You have to have a dad who's a biohacker to pull that off. Yeah.
Yeah, he was getting biohacked in the airplane the whole way with red lights and everything. And his father kind of did it as an experiment on him to see, because he had never trained for a marathon before.
Yeah.
I was impressed that he could pull that off.
Yeah. If you look at if you look at biohacking, I think that a lot of the benefits of it, if we're going to define biohacking as using science and technology and self-quantification to somehow get the body to do something more quickly or more efficiently than it might be able to do in its native state, that the majority of benefits actually do come from what you were just alluding to, being able to recover faster and being able to rest more deeply. I think when you get into the exercise side of biohacking, there's a lot of a lot of perceived shortcuts, right? Like, oh, I'm going to use this fancy machine and get the equivalent of a 3-hour run in a couple of minutes, or attach electrodes to the body with electrical muscle stimulation and build muscle with just a couple 20-minute workouts a week. And I
does
don't.
that stuff work?
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, you could certainly do better than if you were sedentary, but if we're talking about functional strength and resilience, mobility and athleticism, a lot of biohacking tools could maybe be icing on the cake, or something, let's say like electrical muscle stimulation, that you could do if you were injured and unable to move a joint otherwise, or to retrain a muscle that would traditionally be weak. Like, say, like the glutes or the inner quad muscle next to the knee, which is where a lot of knee pain originates in people when that's weak. But then if you look at the recovery side, that's where you tend to see a lot of benefit for longevity in sport and just longevity of the body in general. Everything from hyperbaric oxygen, meaning delivering oxygen into tissues so that you've got the ability to produce more ATP to recover more quickly, or even like a non-pressurized normal baric version of that, like exercising with oxygen therapy, or alternating between hypoxia and hyperoxia using a mask. That's a common exercise modality that can also be used for recovery. Another example would be red light, right? That's probably like the quintessential image that people get in their heads when they think of a biohacker, like laying in a red light bed, or standing in front of a red light panel, or wearing a red light hair growth helmet. And there's actually
does that work?
Difficult to say. Like, I use one, and
You got great hair.
Yeah, thanks. It's the red light helmet. You could make a case that.
Were you bald when you started?
Exactly. Photonic excitation of the follicles or the mitochondria anywhere in the body could theoretically induce some kind of regenerative or growth potential.
Is there any science on
But
it?
one of my friends he's a cosmetic surgeon up in Spokane, and he treats a lot of baldness and receding hairlines. And if you really truly want to grow new hair right now, pretty much gold standard is you need a follicular transplant. And there's certain people that are kind of like experimenting with the idea of like a stamp or a derma roller or a microneedling pen, and then smearing some peptide like GHK copper peptide or some like hair growth stimulant on there, combined with red light. But it's all pretty polyanecdotal right now when it comes to hair growth. But back to the red light, that would be an example of something that does actually have evidence for collagen and elastin stimulation, for mitochondrial stimulation, and for recovery. And then one other example would be something like PEMF. You ever use one of those MATs? It's pulsed electromagnetic field therapy is what PEMF stands for. And this is essentially concentrating typically like a 0 to 100 hertz signal onto the body to improve electron flow, which theoretically would improve metabolic waste in and out of a cell to increase recovery, or to address a muscle that's in like a cramped or a spasmed state. Now you look at all of those things, like those three examples I gave, which would be pretty common tools that would be called biohacking tools: oxygen, red light, and PEMF. And they could accelerate recovery. They might help out with performance a little bit. But I think that the message that more people need to hear is the idea that a lot of these originate from natural primal practices that most people could do for free in their own backyard. Oxygen, just breathing hard, getting on a bike, going for a run, doing breath work. You can actually, move a lot of CO2 and oxygen just with that alone. Even just deep diaphragmatic breathing during the day, which a lot of people don't do. With PEMF, going outside barefoot, swimming in the ocean, walking on the beach, right? Every time lightning strikes the surface of the planet or solar radiation bombards Earth, it collects negative ions, and your skin is a transdermal surface that can actually conduct electricity into the body. So actually being outside barefoot is good for you. Swimming in the ocean, laying on your back in the backyard and stretching. You don't have to have a fancy PEMF mat for that. Or of course the biggest, most obvious one would be red light. I mean, you get full spectrum light from the sun. And
you get, including the red light.
Including the red light. Now, of course, you have to balance that out with UVA and UVB radiation and protect your skin and not burn. But I mean, what I'm getting at is that before anybody goes out and buys like a home soft shell hyperbaric chamber, or Gary Brecka's super cool hard shell one that you can work out in, or uses a PEMF mat or a PEMF tool, or buys a fancy red light bed or red light panel. I mean, go outside, get sunlight, do some breath work, or difficult cardiovascular stimulus for the lungs. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, is what I'm saying, before you get to biohacking. And I think the message more people need to hear is just like, move your body and go outside.
What about peptides?
That was certainly fit into the category of biohacking. So as you know, peptides are super popular right now. I think they're one of the most Googled search terms, recently surpassing pickleball. I use peptides. I've messed around with peptides since 2016. Everything from BPC 157 and TB 500 for injuries, or thymosin alpha 1 for the immune system, or things like SS31 or MOTS-C. They all have Star Wars R2D2 C3PO names that are difficult to remember. But the idea with peptides is that they're very small chains of amino acids that can act with pretty good precision on specific cellular targets, specific cellular receptors. And they seem to work for a lot of people. I think they also need more research. I think that they're a very promising tool. I've used them successfully for a really long time, but I think
What do you mean successfully?
Like injecting a joint that I know would have taken a much longer time to repair if I hadn't used something like BPC 157 or TB 500, or being anxious just due to a high stress work day and using something like intranasal C-Link or injecting C-Link as an anxiolytic. Or even using something like C-Max for improving cognition or verbal fluency, but a lot of this is anecdotal. I think it would be
you
nice.
think you can see a result?
I know I can see a result with peptides. Absolutely, yeah. And of course, I'm not the only one talking about the success that they've had with peptides. I think there just needs to be more research and more structured research done on the safety and efficacy and protocols around peptides, whether that's like, probably be the root of something like IRBs or some type of scenario where a prescribing physician in a clinic would be able to actually use peptides, as something like a research study in a safe environment. I think that's a much better route than what's going on to a great extent right now, which is people hear about peptides and then they go and Google peptides and they find them on the gray market, sold for human research. And when you sell something for human research, you're not even allowed to give out prescribing information about it. So people are at home just like trying to figure out how to inject themselves with something safely because there's very little oversight from a doctor about how to do it. And that's where you hear, the horror stories of somebody just like, getting some sepsis-like condition because they didn't even know they were supposed to use an alcohol swab on the rubber stopper or on their skin before they pulled something up into a syringe, or worse yet, getting something that has, no certificate of analysis and you don't know where it came from, and you don't know the sterility procedure used to produce that peptide. So I think production of peptides and oversight, especially from some kind of a research avenue to figure out what's working and what isn't, and what physician protocols would actually be good to use, is necessary in the peptide world, because it's a little bit of the wild, wild west right now. But I don't think they're bad, just having subjectively used them for a long time.
I mean, you could make the same argument on the supplements.
Yeah.
None of those are tested in clinical trials.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
The FDA only has the authority to regulate drugs that claim a particular indication. And so, as long as they don't claim an indication, they're supposed to be. If a doctor prescribes them, he's supposed to be able to do that without any clinical trials. And
Yeah, I think a lot of doctors still need more education around peptides, though. I mean, a lot of doctors just aren't even familiar with the protocols or what they do, and so yeah, like it's just pretty. They're considered to be just kind of like dark and scary and unknown for a lot of doctors. So I think
And stem cells.
I've done stem cells. I kind of very similar to like the biohacking idea from a regenerative standpoint. I've had a lot of good results. For example, from all the crazy masochistic Ironman stuff, I had full on arthritis in my left knee, and rather than opting for a knee replacement, this was like 7 years ago, super swollen left knee. I couldn't squat, couldn't play tennis, couldn't play pickleball. I wound up getting what's called an intraosseous needling procedure, where a doctor essentially like drilled holes, almost like aerating a lawn on the two articulating surfaces in the knee joint, and then filled that with stem cells as like a cartilage regeneration protocol. And my knees are great now, and that's what turned the corner for me. I've also done stem cell infusions and stem cell injections in other joints, and again, I think that it's a pretty nuanced discussion because there's a lot of different forms of stem cells. There are many international clinics where I know people have gotten hurt from a procedure or been infected from a procedure. And they're still like growing multiple generations of stem cell lines at many of those clinics, which increases the carcinogenicity of a stem cell population, every time that you regrow or re-expand a stem cell line. So I think you need to know where you're getting your stem cells and who's administering them. But I think they hold a lot of promise, particularly for joint regeneration and potentially for organ regeneration.
Anything outside of those categories?
Outside of stem cells, peptides, and supplements, from a biohacking standpoint, I think the idea, if we want to look at it from maybe like a central nervous system, vagus nerve, anxiolytic standpoint, there's a lot in the category of brainwave entrainment or relaxation, or even downregulation of the default mode network, the type of things that people would often look for or look to opioids, muscle relaxants, diazepams, or even from a default mode network, plant medicines to achieve from a mental standpoint that you can stimulate with technology. Like if you look at the vagus nerve, for example, I don't know if you wear a device or measure your heart rate variability or recovery or anything like that, but HRV is a commonly measured metric for recovery. It's the delta between each heartbeat. So the idea is that if you have a lot of variation in between each beat of your heart, you have high heart rate variability, and if it's very, very mild or low beat to beat variation, you have low heart rate variability. And high HRV is an indicator that the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of your nervous system are communicating well with the sinoatrial nodes of your heart, like basically with your cardiac pacemaker cells. And if that occurs, that's a good sign that you're recovered. And if you're very stressed and you're engaging in shallow breathing throughout the day, and you're just basically living in the anxious state that a lot of Americans live in every day, you would tend to see low heart rate variability. And the general recommendation from a non-biohacking standpoint would be breath work, yoga, working on your relationships, getting a good night of sleep, de-stressing, not working too hard. And those are all great. And then if you delve into the world of something like biohacking, you have, for example, the ability to use electronic vagal nerve stimulation, meaning like electrodes directly over kind of like the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, slightly behind the ear, to be able to induce relaxation or high HRV by directly stimulating that. cold water face dunks or cold baths or cold soaks, which kind of fit into the biohacking category. Those would also be something that would stimulate the vagus nerve. You can even use light. There are machines that will use light spectrum very similar to what you'd get from a red light bed or red light panel, but they're directly over either side of the neck. That's one example. Another example would be light sound stimulation and also haptic stimulation. There is a chair that's very common for someone with PTSD, someone with low HRV, or someone who just basically has difficulty turning their brain off. It's basically like a gravity chair that's lined with vibration.
I've seen those, yeah.
Yeah, and
you wear earphones.
Eye mask, you wear earphones. I have one next to my office, in the room next to my office, and you sit in that thing, and it just, even in a racing brain or somebody who's just like, hard charging, high achieving, can't turn things off, you sit in that thing and you just relax. There's a little ankle band that I travel with that does something very similar. You lay in bed and it kind of vibrates the body into this relaxed state that a lot of people would normally rely on, like, a glass of wine or a Valium to achieve. And this is just using technology without any biochemical payback. Final example would be using light and sound. So this is down to like the default mode network piece. Like, a lot of people will shift the brain into a more malleable state, or increase neuroplasticity, or decrease beta brain waves and increase something like focused alpha brain waves or creative theta brain waves using, in many cases, it'll be like psilocybin, LSD, plant medicines, a lot of these things that might work for those conditions, but that also require, hefty amount of time off work, or, you're not going to do that at noon and be back at work, at 1 p.m. after lunch break. You can use light and sound to shift the body into a very similar state. It's a lamp that you lay underneath that flashes light almost like a strobe light, and you've got your eyes closed, but it's shifting your body into that same state. There are head-worn devices like the brain tap or the visor, and these would be more like travel-friendly versions of almost like these goggles that you wear, that people will sit up from and say they feel like they've done something like a psilocybin journey without actually doing that. But more important than anything psychedelic or entheogenic is the idea that it shifts the brain. Like, you feel more relaxed, you feel more creative, you feel more neuroplastic, depending on the reason that you've actually done a session like that. So, long answer to your question, but I would say another category would be just the use of technology instead of drugs to induce a certain mental state.
And have you used that stuff successfully?
Yeah. And they don't work better if you combine them with drugs. I know people who have tried.
How about the cold plunges?
Cold plunges, well,
they build character.
Yeah, they build character. So cold plunges get a bad rap, I think, mostly by people who don't like to be cold. And very similar to what we were talking about with heat, right? Heat shock protein and erythropoietin and cardiovascular blood flow. You see a multitude of benefits that occur from thermal stress in general. And there's obviously two sides of the coin when it comes to thermal stress, heat and cold. And with cold, you see some different mechanisms. You see an acute and immediate vasoconstrictive response as the body goes into like this sympathetic stressed out mode, followed by this vasodilatory rush. Anybody who's gotten out of like a cold plunge or a cold shower, your skin kind of looks a little lobster red afterwards. And the reason is that rebound vasodilatory blood flow that occurs that's actually good for cardiovascular health. I wear a continuous blood glucose monitor, and a lot of people are familiar with the type of things that would keep blood glucose stabilized. Going for a walk before and after a meal, lifting weights or maintaining muscle, which acts as kind of like a sink for extra glucose. Even certain herbs or drugs like berberine as an herb or metformin as a drug. All of these can impact your blood glucose variability. But one thing that surprised me when I started wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, is how effective cold is at stabilizing blood glucose. It seems to have a pretty profound insulin sensitizing effect. And that could be like a cold shower before you're going to go out to a steakhouse at night and punish some of the bread bowl. It could be a morning cold plunge after a sauna session. But the glucose stabilizing effect of cold is one interesting factor that a lot of people don't think about. Another one, and this is especially interesting when you look at the fact that now we're blessed to live in this post-industrial modern era where we live and drive and sleep and work in temperature-controlled boxes, right? It's 90 some degrees in DC right now, and we're at a comfortable 68 or whatever in here. But from a resilient standpoint, the idea of being constantly comfortable, that doesn't necessarily do the body any metabolic favors. So when you're in the cold, you see a shift of metabolically inactive white adipose tissue to metabolically active brown fat. Some influencers will blow this way out of proportion and say, well, you're going to, burn an entire cheesecake in the cold plunge, and that's not true. You do see a slight increase in metabolic rate and a slight improvement in blood glucose stability that lends itself to better metabolic health. The pushback by a lot of people as well as stressful. It's like, sending your body into battle every morning if you're going to go jump in a cold plunge. And furthermore, the second thing people say is, well, it blunts the body's response to your workout, right? If you get in a cold plunge or you get cold after a workout, you will see less mitochondrial proliferation and you'll see less building of satellite cells, which help to grow new muscle. That claim is true, and so is the claim about it being excessively stressful. But for the claim about cold being excessively stressful, what you actually see in long-term studies on cold is for about the first 4 weeks, you get a cortisol response and your body gets very sympathetic. And then over time, you develop the ability to have lower cortisol throughout the day and better nervous system resilience, meaning back to that HRV thing that I mentioned, if you have a regular cold practice. And then with the don't get cold after a workout, bro, thing that people say, yes, that's true. And if you look at the actual studies that put people in cold water or in a cold room after a workout, they're leaving them in there for like 10 to 20 minutes. And you're seeing like a muscle temperature drop of 1 degree or more Celsius. That's inducing that blunting of the natural stress response that you'd normally want the body to have after workout. I don't know a lot of people who are going into a cold plunge for like 10 to 20 minutes after a workout. So the idea of just like cooling off the body for 2 or 3 minutes by taking a quick cold shower, or even just like waiting until later in the day after your workout and doing a cold plunge after an afternoon sauna or something like that is fine. And I'm a huge fan of cold plunging. And I live in Idaho, so I have to be a fan of the cold anyway. So.
And what do you think about all the fascination that we're seeing now with longevity?
It's interesting. There's like there's almost like this near transhumanistic obsession with grasping at immortality, right? So, how much more can you do in your elaborate 5-hour morning routine to get just a few extra, weeks or months or years of life? And some of it's a little bit ironic because, and I'm sure people like this, it seems like all those extra years that people are trying to get are spent, in a hyperbaric chamber, huddled up cold and hungry and libidoless, inside some kind of a HVAC pod. And it's kind of ridiculous if you step back and look at it that way because, Lord of the Rings, right? Gollum lived a really long time. Wasn't necessarily the happiest, most fulfilled character in that book, but he had the longevity game nailed down pretty good. I think that rather than myopically focusing on living as long as possible, which can be a relatively unfulfilling pursuit at the end of the day, we should be focusing at putting more health into the years that we do have. I don't know how long, I'm programmed to live, if we want to look at things from a genetic standpoint. I think I could certainly live a little bit longer using some of the natural and the scientific protocols that we've been talking about. But more importantly, I want to be able to, throw a football around the backyard with my grandkids and climb a mountain and, and hang out and go on vacations with my wife and just be robust and vital and fit for as long as possible, as close as possible to the day that I die. And considering that the longest lived human being on record, I think, is like 117 years old, to claim that somehow in like the next decade we're going to get that to like 130 or 140 or 150 or 180 is, I think, a little bit ridiculous. And we should be focusing more on A, just remaining reasonably vital without it becoming a selfish pursuit, and B, filling our lives with those things that are also just as much, if not more fulfilling than the pursuit of longevity. Staying out past your bedtime with the family, and spending more time with with loved ones, and building relationships, and throwing family dinners, and doing all the things that we know. I mean, even based on like Harvard's longest running study on longevity, trump all of the PMF and the oxygen and peptides and the stem cells and the red light, and that's the amount of and the quality of love and relationships in your life. So I'm not opposed to living healthy, but I do think that some people kind of like take it too far.
So you're not going to move in with Brian Johnson?
I mean, if he invited me, I'd probably go for a few days just to see what it was like. Yeah. I'd probably head home to Idaho pretty quick.
Ben, thank you very, very much.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Really, really good fun. Thank you.
Thanks.